Hello, and a very warm welcome to all of you. I am Eva Jakusheva de Francesco, a policy analyst at the Sustainable Prosperity for Europe program at the European Policy Center. And we are honored to host this virtual event on the role of hydrogen in the energy transition. I am probably preaching here to the converted if I tell you that renewable hydrogen has a great potential to help us decarbonize European economy. First, it can be used for energy storage. By converting renewable energy into hydrogen, energy producers could store surplus energy in large quantities and correct for supply and demand imbalances often experienced by solar, wind, and other renewable energy sources. On the other hand, renewable hydrogen could be used as an end fuel, especially in sectors that are hard to electrify, such as heavy-duty transport and carbon-intensive industry. However, questions have been raised whether sufficient amounts of green hydrogen can be made available in the near future, and in which sectors this hydrogen could and should be used. That's why we invited today Dr. Tudor Constantinescu, Principal Advisor to the Director-General for Energy at the European Commission. Today, he will tell us more about prospects and policies for hydrogen use across different sectors, especially in connection with the Fit for 55 package and the EU hydrogen strategy. Thank you, Tudor, for joining us. We also have the pleasure to have as respondents industry representatives from the members of the EPC. I would like to welcome Ms. Lucie Boost from Equinor, their EU Affairs Manager. Hi, Lucie. Mr. Benedikt Herges from Siemens Energy, where he is heading European Government Affairs. Mr. Mukund Bhagwat, Strategic Advisor for Energy and Climate at the European Copper Institute. Mr. Nicolai Romanowski, Energy Manager at the European Chemical Industry Council. And Mr. Alexander Klatte, expert on energy and climate politics, working at the German Steel Federation. We are expecting today around 100 participants, and we very much look forward to the discussion with you. Just a few words on practicalities. If you are interested to ask a question, please use the chat question. Don't hesitate to post your question as soon as it comes to your mind. You don't need to wait for the Q&A to start, but please do keep your questions short. And now, without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Dr. Tudor Constantinescu for a 10-minute presentation. Floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Eva. Thank you very much for the invitation here today. I'm really pleased to be with you and with all these well-known representatives of industry, and I think this should provide an opportunity for us to exchange on what should be the pathway to make hydrogen really an integral part of the energy system in support of the carbon neutrality agenda and in support of the Green Deal objectives in general. Now, by now, everyone is familiar, of course, with the Green Deal, with its main core objectives, with the targets it has also for 2030, with the energy system integration and hydrogen strategy, which we launched last year, and with the Alliance. But I would like to put a little bit these things into a perspective, and also to show what are the steps now we have taken to create the proper legislative regulatory framework which to trigger and to help all the investments which were foreseen also through the recovery and resilience, through the structural funds, to steer into the best possible direction for member states, for regions, and to support industries in decarbonization efforts. On the next slide, you see here a little bit is our analysis on how the energy and hydrogen landscape is foreseen to change. It's of course based on the best modeling we have available and data, and no one pretends that real life will behave exactly as we model it. But in any case, there is a high degree of certitude that we cannot achieve carbon neutrality without renewables, first of all, moving into the center stage, without energy efficiency moving into the center stage, and without decarbonizing not only the power generation sector, but also the entire sectors of the economy. And as you can see, first of all, to energy efficiency, we estimate to succeed to moderate the energy demand. We also estimate the role of electricity will increase. So from about 1/4 now to about 1/2 by 2050. But still half of the energy system will be based on molecules. And we will have biomass, we will have biogas, but we also need to have more in the energy, especially not based on electrons, but on molecules. And if you look at speaking about gases, the way we see it, gradually in the various scenarios, it's clear that the role of hydrogen and synthetic gases will increase, and the role of natural gas will significantly decrease. Speaking from a global perspective, if you look at the hydrogen global demand from the IEA, and the report came just this summer, and we also contributed to it. As many countries around the globe, you know, IEA is a big organization also in terms of data. Its estimates to have a global demand increasing from about 90 million tons today to about 500 and more by 2050. And the share will increase of hydrogen and in the different sectors, in particular in some which now is not even taking part, like in power, in much more in syn fuels, and buildings will start to also appear as interesting. And at the same time, on the last corner, you see how the price of this hydrogen, in particular coming from renewables, can decrease, and what is the potential already now for 2030. And we see how wind and solar can make actually hydrogen, renewable hydrogen, quite competitive even in the next decade at even a global level, and in particular for Europe. Now, you can see here that we speak about particular renewable hydrogen, but we are aware that some countries and also in Europe will acknowledge that we'll need also low carbon hydrogen. And, you know, some countries are maybe even investing heavily on this will help decarbonizing the energy system and the hydrogen economy ecosystem which we put in place. On the next slide, if you look a bit at the outlook for 2030 from the IEA at the global level again, here we see that on the left side you have the current trends, and then we move to about 105 million tons of hydrogen demand by 2030, and then supported by all these policies and by the driver of the policy changes towards achieving carbon neutrality in 2050, and the need, and this is one of the big things of the Green Deal, that is not delaying investment, but on the contrary, is pushing investments to happen already in the next decade. And now we see many countries are to a certain extent following Europe in this respect. We see how hydrogen in different sectors will start to increase their share. So the demand in refining is set to grow as the sector recovers the activity lost during the pandemic. The chemical industry, again, very much, and in particular for ammonia, for fertilizers, with the population growth, this will be more and more important. And then in steel making, where hydrogen can make a difference in particular. Also in transport, now we saw over the last years that the demand is expanding quickly, and it has grown more than sixfold over the last years. Also, the use is not so much as initially some have thought in cities, where electric cars definitely have an advantage, pure battery electric vehicles, but for longer distances and heavy duty transport, and gradually for maritime and for aviation, for synthetic fuels, hydrogen seems to play a very important role. Now, it is in this context, the global level to expand to this 120 million tons, that more than 10% would come from new uses of hydrogen. So it is an evolving world for the energy mix, and also an evolving world for the hydrogen, for the uses of hydrogen in the economy. On the next slide, and aware of the time, I may try to be a bit faster. Speaking briefly, to recall the hydrogen strategy now, because why is this important? Because it has set these milestones for 2024 already, and then for 2030, with 6 gigawatts of renewable electrolyzers and replacing existing hydrogen production in particular. So we have about 10 million tons currently of hydrogen in Europe produced. But 2030 to have 40 gigawatts and to start new applications in steel and transport, supported by the creation of hydrogen valleys and by building in place the infrastructure for which now we are in the process of creating the regulatory framework and also the financing of important projects of common interest. Now, in 2050, definitely this should be anchored well in the energy system, and hydrogen could represent about 15% in some scenarios, some analyses even more, of the energy mix, moving from a very modest percentage. If it is just for energy use, now is less than 0.1%. If we include all the feedstock and so, it's about slightly below 2%. On the next slide, we'll see that the hydrogen strategy is in full, how to say, implementation stage now. It is, first of all, an investment agenda, and we speak about 40 billion euros in electrolyzers, but we need 80 to 120 gigawatts of extra renewables. And for this, there are other 200, 300 billion euros to be invested in renewables, plus 65 billion euros in infrastructure. And the alliance helps identify projects. And then we have the state aid rules, the cohesion policies, the recovery and resilience, which all will support co-financing and trigger investments. Then we have the boosting and demand and scale up production. We speak here about certification. We speak here about carbon contracts for difference to support renewable and low carbon hydrogen. And then the ETS, the hydrogen infrastructure with the 10E and 10T and the Alternative Fuel Infrastructure Directive, and now the regulations, the research and innovation. Partnership is essential. Here we speak about the joint undertaking, which will become Clean Hydrogen Partnership, but also about other, definitely about other partnership, which we'll do in particular in context of the Clean Hydrogen Alliance, and the international dimension, which is very important. We speak about developing a future international market for renewable and low carbon hydrogen. Europe has an interest also in that. We see big opportunities for collaboration, in particular with our neighbors, being in the south or in the east, and being part of an investment agenda as well, and enabling to bring renewable hydrogen also to Europe, and supporting, on the other hand, those countries to implement effectively an energy system integration approach. Plus the whole work with the international community in the Clean Energy Ministerial. We launched, for example, a Global Ports Coalition also to support these developments and this international market. And mission innovation under the, which we have the Hydrogen Valley is promoted, and the International Partnership for Hydrogen Economy, where we try in particular to set this certification and standards for renewable low carbon hydrogen for different production pathway to calculate the greenhouse gas emission reductions. Now, without entering more in details, now next slide, it's about briefly the Fit for 55 package, which we came in July to actually, in addition to the financing, now we speak about 1.8 trillion euros recovery and resilience plus multi-annual financial framework. But all this money have to be channeled in such a way, because we know public money, even if it is the most impressive budget for these investments in the energy transition and carbon neutrality, still is not enough. And we need to attract private funding and to create the regulatory framework which to attract and to ensure predictability and to ensure also the effectiveness of the funding. So 13 legislative initiatives accompanied by a climate social fund should help in this direction. There are provisions on the various important directives on the next slide. In particular, I would mention the RED II proposal, of course, the renewable directive, which is doubling the current target of 20% to 38–40% by 2030, and we have specific targets for renewable hydrogen to represent half of consumption in industry, and 2.6% of the renewable fuels of non-biological origin. All this will be facilitated, of course, by energy efficiency first principle and the moderation of demand with a more ambitious target also on energy efficiency. Then we have the alternative fuel infrastructure regulation with refueling stations for hydrogen every 150 kilometers or in urban nodes where we have light duty and heavy duty vehicles as well. The fuel aviation maritime proposals now, 2027 ETS free auctioning for aviation and also for bigger ships we covered by the ETS. Now, plus we stimulate the uptake of sustainable fuels, including hydrogen. I mentioned already for some sectors for ETS, but I have to say ETS is very important. On the one hand, it's deepened. So we, on the sectors which are covered now, only 41%, will try to achieve even higher emission reductions through the ETS, 63%. On the other hand, we try to expand the scope of the ETS and to cover other sectors of 2025, for example, also road transport and buildings. And to compensate for the vulnerable consumers here, we'll create the climate social fund. Plus the production of hydrogen electrolyzers, the larger ones will also receive free allowances, and then the support mechanism, carbon contract for difference. The energy taxation is also moving from more labor taxation towards green taxation. Of course, governments need revenues. If these revenues help developing a more sustainable economy, a more green economy in line with the Green Deal, and at the same time support job creation, of course, this is what we try to propose. And finally, last but not least, the proposal for a decarbonized gas and hydrogen market for December, which is really trying to support creation of this infrastructure for and operating the markets for hydrogen and for repurposing the existing assets we have for gas, in particular transmission level, and to enable the access of hydrogen and renewable gases and their contribution to decarbonization of the economy. Now, without going more in details, because I'm aware of the time, I'm happy to try to answer if there is any question or anyhow to stay with you and listen to the debate further on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tudor. You really managed to fit a lot in a short time, and thank you for the comprehensive overview. Now I would like to give floor to our EPC industry representatives. First, I would like to give floor to Ms. Lucie from Equinor. If you're not familiar, Equinor is an energy company developing oil, gas, wind, and solar energy in more than 30 countries. It supports also developments in carbon capture and hydrogen. And Lucie, I would like to ask you, what are your views on the place of hydrogen in the energy transition? The floor is yours.
Thank you for inviting us and for having us here in this important discussion indeed. I have a couple of slides that I would like to share with you, and the first one, yes, indeed, and the first one actually relates to a number of projects that we're involved in, which clearly shows that we do believe in hydrogen as a product that needs to be part of our decarbonization portfolio. However, we as a company invest both in blue and green hydrogen as well as CCS. And we see a role for hydrogen in many of the sectors that have already been described by Mr. Constantinescu, and also in the hard-to-abate industry, of course, but also in heavy-duty vehicle and maritime transport. As liquid hydrogen or ammonia, I'm not going to go into detail of all of the different projects. It would take us too far, but it's just to illustrate that as a company, we really want to put our money where our mouth is and make those investments. And then I would like to take us to the next slide, which is actually more related to green hydrogen and the development of green hydrogen as being a solution of the decarbonization. This is actually a slide that was shared by Helge Haugner, which is our SVP for gas and power at Flame Conference yesterday. And to show you the extent of the investment that is needed, together with SSE and ENI, we're building one of the largest offshore wind parks in the UK to date, which has a capacity of about 3.6 gigawatt hours of production. This power will actually go straight to the grid, the UK grid, but the illustration here shows what could happen if instead we would dedicate this mega project into a green hydrogen production to help stabilize the system. As you can see from the conversion on the slide, you could end up at somewhere around 14 terawatt hour of hydrogen of energy, the equivalent of 1.4 BCM of natural gas into the system. It's quite a bit of energy, but to put it into perspective, today Europe already consumes more than 400 BCM of natural gas, and the world consumes more than 4,000 BCM. So in comparison, it's almost a drop on a hot plate. But even if you do believe that thousands of these Dogger Bank projects can be built quickly and that we can use the renewables for hydrogen instead of electricity on the grid, it would still be quite a very short period time that we need in order to get the electrolyzing capacity needed. And we also need to remember that this would then probably get a portion of natural gas out of the energy mix, but we also want to replace coal, we want to replace oil, we want to replace nuclear, and to also replace the existing grey hydrogen production. That brings us actually more or less rather fast into my next slide, which talks about a different project that we, as an energy contributor to the European Union and a trusted partner for many decades already as an importer of energy into the EU, would like to continue to do in the future. The world indeed is changing. Climate is dictating that we need to review the way that we both produce and consume energy. And Norway Energy Hub, which is actually the project that this slide is describing, is a formulation of how energy export out of Norway could look in the future while remaining relevant and contributing to an energy transition in providing more and more access to renewable and low carbon energy. As you will see from the arrows, it includes renewable electricity, hydrogen, gas, because also the European community sees a need for gas still in 2050. We hope that that will go together with CCS, which then also is illustrated by the CO2 arrow. And then we assume that when looking at imports, there will also be room for ammonia. In short, it's a plan for how Norway and European stakeholders collectively can contribute towards the long-term value creation and towards jobs. It revolves around digitalization of wind, offshore wind, commercialization of transport and storage of CO2, and also the scale-up of hydrogen production. What is needed in order to get to such an industrial scale development? And that's where we come probably closer to what was already described by Mr. Constantinescu. I will again maybe not go into all of the details on the slide for the sake of time, but what we definitely need to do, and I probably also made the same mistake during the presentation I'm doing today, is move away from the color coding green, blue, or any other color of the rainbow. We believe that it's absolutely crucial that we come to clear definitions of what is going to be renewable and low carbon hydrogen, because it's not the production process that will make it renewable, it's actually the in-feed of the feedstock that will make your product renewable. If hydrogen is going to be used as an energy vector, it will be regulated, and therefore we also need to see a regulation coming into place. We hope to discover that together with the rest of us on the 14th of December. We will need cross-border flows, and we will need quality standards. We will need GOs. Unfortunately, the GOs developed under RED II are only meant for renewable hydrogen. We hope to see also a standard developed for low carbon hydrogen so that customers get the freedom to choose and to also be able to compare apples with apples. And last but not least, we will also need financial support for liftoff of the projects. And when it comes to imports, of course, we suppose an OPEX support for industry. That kind of concludes my introductory remarks to this very interesting discussion.
Thank you very much, Lucie. Now I would like to move to Benedikt Herges from the Siemens Energy. Benedikt, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me here. I'm Benedikt Herges with Siemens Energy. As you know, Siemens Energy is a new company with a long history. Essentially, Siemens put all the energy business into a new company, and that's us, and we are listed on the German Stock Exchange. I want to first congratulate the Commission on the package. I think with regard to hydrogen, it is a massive opportunity. Our estimates are that for transport, we incentivize around 35 gigawatt of electrolysis and around 23 to 29 gigawatt for industry. And the key driver here are really the quotas. So for any policymakers on this call, quotas are the most important drivers here. But I will talk about hydrogen and electricity, and there is not so much on hydrogen and electricity markets in the Fit for 55 package. So let's have a look at this one. Electricity markets will be decarbonized with renewable energy. We all know that. It's going to be massive upscaling that we need, but we still need dispatchable capacity to get it done. And very roughly, let me put the hydrogen into context. There are three pillars that are important to get to decarbonization here. The first one is we need to mandate a fuel switch away from coal. Still a lot of coal out there. Secondly, we need to increase renewable, increase system efficiency so that we can actually get the full load hours, the operational hours of gas-fired power stations down over time. And then the third step, and this is where the hydrogen comes in, or the third pillar, where hydrogen comes in. This is we need to prepare for full decarbonization in that step. Let me take this on an example of Germany, because this is where with the coal phase out and nuclear phase out is most evident. There is a new study by the BDI, Klimapfade-Studie. They look at what does it actually take to make Germany carbon neutral by 2045. And let me decline this along these three pillars. First, coal exit by 2030 is what the study says it needs. And what does it mean for gas? It means for gas doubling the capacity to 2045. So from 30 gigawatt today to 73 in 2030 and to 88 in 2045. So becoming carbon neutral actually means we need in the electricity market in Germany double the gas capacity. Second pillar, gas consumption. So how does it look here? So we would get down from 100 terawatt hours today, or we would get up from 100 to 200 terawatt hours in 2030. And only then we would get down to 67 terawatt hours in 2045, which relates to the coal and nuclear phase out. And then the increase in capacity where in 2045, the role of gas is really to secure a reliable electricity system. Third pillar, so how do we get to zero? This is the hydrogen. Yeah. What does it mean in fuel? So if we take this for Germany, we need to replace the natural gas with clean hydrogen. So 100 terawatt hours a day, 200 in 2030, and 67 in 2045. If I compare this, the RFNBO quota in the current RED 3, that's 2.6, the 2.6%, that's 87 terawatt hour. So in 2030, in the electricity, we have to double. And this is where we have right now the problem a little bit. There's a clear mismatch between, on the one side, the political ambition to decarbonize natural gas, yeah, with hydrogen, such as we see it in the EU taxonomy with 100 gram. And on the other hand, the political incentives that the Commission is actually bringing on the table to replace natural gas with hydrogen. Yeah. This is a mismatch that we need to address, but we need to prepare already today. Yeah, our turbines can already co-fire hydrogen between 30 and 75%. And we need to make sure that every investment that we do today is ready for carbon neutral operations. And in terms of hydrogen, that doesn't mean that every turbine that we need in the electricity system can run from today on 100% of hydrogen, but it means that the turbine needs to be upgradable so that over time it can accommodate the hydrogen shares that it takes. So it is about upgradability at a limited additional investment cost. EU turbines, they have developed a concept with the entire European sector on that one. They will present it also here in Brussels on the 16th of November. And then we need to get the infrastructure ready as well. And then we need to solve this mismatch that we have in EU legislation right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Benedikt, for raising these points. Now I would like to give floor to Mukund Bhagwat from the European from the European Copper Institute, which represents European copper industry, mining companies, custom smelters, and semi-fabricators. Off to you.
Thank you, Eva. Thank you, EPC, for arranging this symposium, which is very timely, because we have to be hydrogen ready. Of course, there are problems at this moment about adequacy, about mismatch, etc. Nevertheless, it will also take time for users like copper industry to be prepared to take hydrogen when it is available in the right quality, in the right amount, at right price. And that gives some of the concerns that we are, let's say, looking ahead at this moment. But to introduce copper, when we are talking about copper industry, it contains from mining, the primary mines, which are global, to smelters and refiners, which are largely present in Europe, with one of the best environmental performance. And when we talk of environmental performance, we talk of SO2, the sulfur dioxide emissions, but also carbon dioxide emissions, which are already, as compared to, for example, global average, quite good, quite high, quite low. And they are still not yet zero. And that is where a big role is given for hydrogen, because we are, in a way, one of the difficult sectors to decarbonize. Difficult because some of the minerals contain carbon. At one side, some of the, let's say, raw materials coming back at secondary raw materials also contain plastics, contain carbon, which cannot be completely removed for recycling. So we need a reduction agent. So traditionally, I mean, in the early, let's say 100 years ago, the poles, that means the trees, trunks, were used to decarbonize, but now they are replaced by either coke or gas for the efficient production. And essentially, we would like to replace them completely as a molecule by hydrogen when the technology is ready for that. Is that the only purpose? No. The second purpose for which we will need hydrogen is, for example, for the hauling trucks for mining. We are discussing here trucks of up to 300-ton capacity. So one tire of the truck is, in fact, 2 times my size, which is 2 meters, 4 meters size truck tire, just to give an example. And then there are alternatives for that. You can have battery electric vehicle there, you can have hydrogen-based fuel cell vehicle, or you can have trolleys. And what will determine the use of hydrogen in this particular case? It is a combination of energy efficiency first, the material efficiency, as well as competitiveness. So when we have loss of, let's say, if we can use renewable electricity directly for whatever purpose, whether it is for heating or whether it is for charging, it depends on the cost of renewable electricity, which is different in Chile as compared to in Spain, as compared to in Germany or Sweden. It's also competing, the renewable electricity itself is competing with the source, whether it is wind or solar or hydro, depending on the context. So copper industry is a global industry. The copper price is also globally determined price. And to remain competitive is absolutely important for all the players everywhere. So essentially, we have to make available the hydrogen to the doorstep of the copper smelters, refiners, at a competitive price, depending on the local context. That local context can be completely different depending on availability of wind, solar, etc., etc. So we are certainly, copper industry in general is very much interested in going along. We are watching, we are already launching some pilots. For example, in Germany, one smelter has launched a pilot to see if we can combine hydrogen along with nitrogen to provide the reductive atmosphere. And by experimenting, we will be able to optimize our production processes. And the same thing is happening with the hydrogen-based fuel cell-based hauling vehicles outside Europe. And we are watching these experiments carefully to see under what economic conditions, of course, the quality has to be very high, under what economic conditions we can start deploying. We expect between 5 to 10 years to be very ready with the use of hydrogen. Probably the readiness will be earlier. The question is whether we can get support, innovation support for either the first pilots or for demonstrating deployment in one way or another, and that will certainly enable us to go completely carbon neutral. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now I would like to turn to the view of the chemical industry. We have here on the panel Nicolai from the European Chemical Industry Council. And I would like to ask you, what do we need to get right to achieve a functioning hydrogen economy?
Yeah, thank you very much, Eva. And thank you very much for having us at this very timely and distinguished panel. I have prepared a couple of slides, which I think will help clarify a bit where our industry stands on the issue of hydrogen, particularly with view to the decarbonization of our sector, which you should see here. So in the chemical sector, we'd like to think of ourselves as a bit of a front runner in the EU hydrogen economy. That is owed to the fact that at the moment, we are one of the largest industrial consumers of hydrogen and producers. And that will actually stay the case even until 2030 and 2050, depending a bit on the hydrogen uptake in the European steel sector. Because of how crucial hydrogen is to our processes, we're also quite pleased in facilitating the roundtable on clean hydrogen in industrial applications as part of the umbrella of the European Clean Hydrogen Alliance. Obviously, the objective of that alliance is to scale up as quickly as possible low carbon and renewable hydrogen to get us away from that status quo of mainly fossil-based hydrogen, which we see at the moment. Now, for our sector, that means in particular to use an increasing share of hydrogen to replace natural gas for heating purposes. But that also means to use an increasing share of low carbon and renewable hydrogen to replace fossil-based hydrogen for feedstock purposes. And I want to highlight that last point in particular because a significant share of the natural gas and the hydrogen that we use is actually for feedstock purposes. Now, why that is significant is that means that our installations and our processes are quite sensitive to impurities. For instance, already around 1.5% of hydrogen blended into the natural gas stream of our feedstock can produce significant challenges for our industrial sites. And so certainly going forward, in particular with view to the gas package, we'll be very intent at looking towards securing a stable gas quality as part of that package, even as we scale up the hydrogen economy across the EU. Now, that being said, our members are also quite actively engaged in making that transition to climate neutrality happen. And on the graph on your right side here, you see some of the projects that have been registered in the chemical industry under the Clean Hydrogen Alliance, already amounting to about 300,000 tons of low carbon and renewable hydrogen by 2026. Obviously, that's a tremendously positive step in the right direction, but there's still more work to be done to get us to some of the goals of the Fit for 55 package, especially as we look towards 2030. And so on the next slide, I want to look a bit at what will be needed from that package to really get us to those objectives. Now, as a whole, we are, of course, very much welcome of the Fit for 55 package in providing some of the regulatory incentives to scale up low carbon and renewable hydrogen. But we also want to point out that there are a number of features which we think are still essential to a functioning hydrogen economy and which at the moment are not yet fully developed. One of those points being, for instance, a framework for the uptake of a hydrogen market and a kind of governance structure for hydrogen infrastructure. Obviously, we'll be looking towards the gas package, which is going to be coming out at the end of the year to provide a bit of clarity on that. A second point, no less important, I think, is the framework for classification and certification of hydrogen, including for imports to make sure that everyone's playing on the same level playing field. And what that also means is that we're waiting quite eagerly for the publication of the Delegated Act on additionality to have a clear view as to what hydrogen exactly we can count as renewable, which will be an essential component in trying to determine how to get to those volumes by 2030. Finally, underlying all of this is, of course, an availability of sufficient amounts of renewable electricity. And here we're very much looking towards the EU and member states to provide those volumes in whatever way possible. If that means easing permitting, fantastic. If that means reducing administrative barriers, great. And I think the RED III proposal of the Commission actually takes a first step in that direction, and that's very positive. Finally, throughout all of this, I think it's important to highlight the point of regulatory predictability. We've seen on the previous slide that a lot of our member companies are already putting steel into the ground, developing projects even today. That means that the regulatory landscape going forward should endeavor not to undercut those projects, because otherwise that would poison investment confidence and confidence in industry, and it would make everything that comes after much more difficult. And at the bottom half of the slide, you see here a few fairly specific comments where we're not to lose a few words on the specific RED III proposal of the Commission. Lots of positive elements in there, but I think especially when it comes to that RFNBO target for industry, there are still a few question marks that we need to be answered. For instance, if we have a technology-specific mandate, as we have with that RFNBO target, nationally, there needs to be a commensurate effort of supporting measures, because clearly we're operating in global markets, and there needs to be a mechanism to offset those increased costs. Secondly, we want to highlight that the production and the consumption of hydrogen, especially in Europe, does not happen in correlated areas. So when we're looking at a member state target, we want to think about whether or not efficiency in the whole system cannot be improved by raising that to an EU level. And finally, and I realize that may be a bit specific to us perhaps, but when we produce hydrogen, at least a good share of that hydrogen is produced as a byproduct. We, so to speak, cannot help but producing it. So having an uptake mandate for renewable hydrogen then raises the question of what to do with the byproduct hydrogen. And I think some of these questions will need to be answered by the RED III proposal going forward in order to make sure that it's fit for purpose. And that's actually where I want to stop here, and looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I would like to give word to Alexander Klatte from the German Steel Federation. Alexander, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. I hope you can hear me. I got the note that my internet connection is not that good, so I still hope you can understand me.
We hear you very well.
Okay, very good. So I just want to make 3 points. First thing is, the steel industry is a very big CO2 emittent, and this is mostly because it has a lot of process emissions. That means by producing steel, you automatically produce CO2. So that's why it's called a hard-to-abate sector, because in the chemical process of producing primary steel, using carbon or carbon monoxide as a reduction agent, you automatically produce CO2. So because we also need steel in the future for cars, for infrastructure like bridges, and a lot of other things, steel needs to be produced green. And for that, we need to reduce the process emissions. And that can be done with hydrogen, because this is the second point, it replaces the reduction agent carbon with hydrogen. So you don't produce CO2 emissions automatically anymore for producing primary steel. So hydrogen is the key to reach carbon neutrality in steel industry, in steel making. And that also can be seen when you use 1 ton of hydrogen in the steel industry, you can reduce 28 tons of CO2 by it. Why? because the steel industry is so dirty and is so carbon-based that by replacing the carbon, you replace so much CO2. So 1 ton of hydrogen replaces 28 tons of CO2. This is very, very unique. And so the problem is not that much that we don't have the technology and we don't have the way to do it. We need the hydrogen to do it, besides some other things. But one of the key things is that we need the hydrogen. And to make substantial reduction steps until 2030, which is key to reach the 2050 goal, we need flexibility. That means flexibility in the upcoming Delegated Act for Sustainable Green Electricity Usage for electrolyzers, because the more hydrogen we can use, the more CO2 we can reduce. And that's why the Delegated Act should allow us to build electrolyzers and use hydrogen in a more flexible way. And the second thing where we need flexibility is not only green hydrogen and green energy will lead to CO2 emissions in the steel industry, but also blue, precursor hydrogen, and natural gas will also lead to CO2 reductions, because natural gas is mostly methane, and methane is made out of hydrogen and carbon, which are both reduction agents. So both can be used to produce primary steel. And because it's only part carbon and part hydrogen, it will produce less CO2. There's like a linear correlation between how much carbon you has as a reduction agent and how much you have as a hydrogen as a reduction agent. So to say steel is important, steel needs to be green. For that we need hydrogen. For that we need flexibility. For that we need flexibility in the regulation, in the upcoming regulation. So I think this would wrap up my points. Thank you very much.
Apologies, I was muted. Thank you very much, Alexandre. I would like now to give floor to Tudor in case he would like to raise any responses to the initial remarks.
I have to say that my connection had a problem, so that I turned off the camera as well. So if you have, please repeat a question completely, because I had heard fragments. So what question concretely would you like me to try to say something, please?
There were no direct questions. I was more asking in case you have responses to the remarks. But in case anybody on the panel would like to raise a direct question, please do go ahead.
From what I heard from the panel, again, with apologize, I didn't hear everything, but it was clear that it's a very strong interest from industry, which we very much welcome, and which was proven also in the work of the Alliance with all the projects collected, and also with the foreseen projects in end-use sectors, but also for the production, in particular of renewable hydrogen, 85% of them. I clearly understood the interest for this delegated act, and I have to say the work is in progress on this. And we know its importance, as we know the importance to continue with the hydrogen and gas decarbonization package. So, but if there is anything in particular you'd like me to refer to, please, yeah, tell me.
With that, I would like now to open the Q&A session. We have about 10 to 15 minutes. So if you do have questions, please go ahead and ask. The first question from the audience comes from Christopher Anderson, who asked, what opportunities may hydrogen present for heavy-duty vehicles? I believe the copper industry might have say in this respect.
Yeah, maybe I can comment briefly. heavy duty vehicle, for us, it is the super heavy duty vehicle that we are talking about, where we can use hydrogen more as a component of fuel cell based electricity produced vehicle in the first place, in competition with, of course, battery electric vehicle. As you can understand, the 300-ton vehicle, if its own weight is made very heavy, it is not going to be very energy efficient. So with the fuel cell and hydrogen combination, we think it might work, but this is not yet proven. So we are evaluating at this stage. And I think this is the basic point, that it will always be competition from the energy efficiency between the material efficiency and the competitiveness, which means the price, essentially the productivity which can be achieved with it. With that, I will leave it to others to comment on heavy duty vehicles for transport. Thank you.
If I may add to this, so we actually see for the heavy duty transport also a massive role for e-fuels, so fuels that are based on wind and sun energy and then transformed into e-fuel, into e-gasoline, and this is simply because we will have a huge demand for renewable energy if we want to decarbonize the economy. And we heard it from steel as well, the massive amounts that they will need. And the big advantage of e-fuels is that they are transportable. I can transport them across the globe. And this actually means I can use renewable energy sources across the world, there where the conditions are the best, where I get, for example, we have a project in Chile right now, all the way south in Chile, where we can get 6,000 hours of onshore wind, compared to Germany, there we have around 2,000, 2,500 hours. So we can get the electricity costs massively down, and this will make e-fuels competitive. We believe we can produce them in the range of €1.10 to €1.50 by 2030 if we get the ramp up now down. And there is a massive opportunity because we can use this very competitive renewable energy. In Chile, we aim at producing in our roadmap 550 million liters of e-fuels by 2026.
Thank you very much. The second question we received from the audience is directed to Dr. Constantinescu, and it comes from Luisa de Castro, who is arguing that in the context of the new proposed binding target for final and energy consumption under the Energy Efficiency Directive, there is also the issue that producing hydrogen and other low carbon fuels it has been argued by some that is more energy intensive than just using unconverted natural gas. So the question she's raising is, how are hydrogen targets compatible with stronger energy efficiency targets?
Yeah, this can be indeed a longer discussion, but what I can say is that we try also to promote, even through the Energy Efficiency Directive, the energy efficiency first principle, and also we try to promote system efficiency at the same time. System efficiency with the boundaries of decarbonization and the targets we have for decarbonization. So we have to act in this framework. And, today 96% of hydrogen is produced mainly from natural gas. So in the future, will be more based from renewables. So replacing fossil-based hydrogen, renewable hydrogen is not expected to increase the overall energy consumption, as efficiencies are similar. So on one hand, then if it is in the second option to use hydrogen to replace fossil fuels, here renewable hydrogen could be potentially used, and this would lead to reduce primary energy demand. However, the energy consumed by the end consumer depends on the technology for hydrogen consumption. Now, for example, fuel cells are much more efficient than for example, in internal combustion engines. So it's all these things will have to be clearly taken into account. But what we have through our analysis so far got it is that with the objective to produce renewable hydrogen, the change in primary energy consumption is not expected to be significant. But of course, we are happy to provide more detailed answers if need is.
Thank you very much for this answer. The next question I would like to raise by myself. Recently in an interview for CNBC, the CEO of Siemens Energy argued that there is no commercial case for green hydrogen yet. And I would like to direct the question not only to Benedikt, but basically to all of you. What do you think is now are the most important steps that we need to focus on, if you were to focus on the one that you would like to mention to make green hydrogen commercially viable?
Shall I start then?
Yeah, if you like it.
I think we can see it maybe a little bit as 3 steps. Yeah, the first step is about funding and financing that is needed, and this is essentially to get industrial scale demonstrators. Yeah, this is what we are doing now with the European Commission and governments in terms of IPCEI, but also in terms of the state aid guidelines, innovation fund, etc. The second stage is to get the market ramp up. Yeah, what the Commission is intending with the 40+40 gigawatt. It's about creating a commercialization of the technology. And this is what Fit for 55 is about. And here the key driver for investments are the quotas that we have for the transport and for the industry. They will trigger the investments. And then once the technology costs go down and we get a mature market, this is when the carbon pricing will kick in, and where the carbon pricing can then actually create also sustainable long-term markets. So it is important that in Fit for 55, we really try to be successful on the quotas and don't lose ambitions on the quotas. We need to get the carbon pricing up and running, and carbon pricing includes also the energy taxation directive, which is a bit more powerful than the EU ETS still. But the carbon pricing will only really trigger the full investments once the technology costs go down. So it's a little bit these 3 steps that we see.
Sorry, Eva,
you're muted, Eva.
Yeah.
My apologies. Please go ahead.
Yeah, if I can just repeat what CEFIC has already said, what Nicolai mentioned, we need to have a good quality and good quality classification. So when we are when we are exchanging molecules in our processes, the quality, I mean, copper, for example, when we produce copper, it is like 99.999% pure. And if you have there either organic compounds or something else disturbing the process, it is very difficult to get that kind of quality. So in addition to what all the factors which Benedikt mentions, which we support completely, the innovation support, availability, quota, etc., it's important the classification and the quality. I will not dwell too much on the guarantees of origin because I'm not an expert on that. But it is important to, if the lawmakers are going to ask from us that we use renewable hydrogen, we need to know that it's not for industry to determine it. We need to have a system in place to make it happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Nicolai, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just to come back on one point that Benedikt mentioned and that I wanted to touch on, which is the quotas. I hear what you're saying about them being effective in delivering volumes of hydrogen, but they also need to be efficient. And to that end, I think quotas, if they're put forward, necessarily need to be part of a broader enabling framework, which we'd like to see specifically in the form of an industrial strategy that combines them with, for instance, funding mechanisms, be they carbon contracts for difference under the Innovation Fund, or other vehicles to ensure commercial viability, because without that, in an internationally competitive market, I think there's more damage done than benefits gained. Besides that, I wanted to come back to that point on the availability of renewable electricity, which I mean is the be all and end all for renewable hydrogen volumes. So whatever we can do in facilitating the scale up of those will absolutely need to be part of that package going forward.
Thank you, Nicolai. Lucie, please go ahead.
Yeah, maybe a couple of complementing remarks actually to what both Benedikt and Nicolai have already mentioned. First of all, I think we need to be able to define what is renewable hydrogen going forward, because if we do not have a very good definition, as the Commission is intending to prepare under the RFNBO Act, we risk raising the CO2 emissions. And actually, our goal is to reduce CO2 emissions by 2030 by 55% at least. So that first, and then secondly, of course, we need renewable wind. We need lots of it. We welcome the strategy that has been elaborated on offshore energy and also the hybrid projects. We believe that that is going to help, but it takes time to construct these things. And normally, we believe that it's on average 7 to 10 years in order to get this into the market. So if we believe that that takes indeed that long, we will not see the renewable hydrogen coming into the markets before 2030.
Thank you, Lucie. With that, we've just reached our time. I would like to offer you the floor in case you have anything else to add. Please do go ahead, raise your hand. If not, yes, we do. Please do. Let's start with Bhagwat, please.
So I can talk now? Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Just to wrap up again, I think we all agree on that we need flexibility to make a big start now. When we are waiting for the perfect regulation, for the perfect system, we will not be done in 2050. We need to start now, and for that we will need to work with what we have. We need to work with the energy system we have. We need to work with the energy grid we have. We need to use the infrastructure we have. So I really wish, like in November is also my birthday, so I can also make a wish now. My wish would be that we have a flexible delegated act which allows us to start with the hydrogen transformation in steel industry and other industries as well. Chemical industry is also very big, just to let us start. We need the flexibility, otherwise it doesn't work.
Thank you very much for this point. Lucie, the floor is yours.
Probably a bit contradictory point. Yes, we need flexibility. We also need to keep in mind the CO2 emissions. And therefore, we do make a case that there just doesn't need to be room for renewable hydrogen, but also for low carbon hydrogen, which we can deliver at 95% reduction rate. And I think it's more important than to wait for the real renewable hydrogen and in the meantime be able to produce blue hydrogen with a very low emission rate and indeed contribute to the emissions reductions that we intend to have by 2030 and 2050.
Thank you. Benedikt?
Yeah, can only agree. Let's get things done. Yeah, let's create volumes. I would also say volumes over color, because we need so much. Yeah, I mean, this transformation is so big. We need to get the volumes. It's very important. And then with regard to electricity, what I've been saying, let's get coherence in there, that we don't create emission performance thresholds on the one side that do not match what we are doing on the other side. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. I believe that's all for today. I would like to thank you all for joining this lively and interesting discussion. I would like to thank our audience for listening in, for posing interesting questions. And I look forward to more discussions in the future. Thank you very much again.